start with some things about the landscape in which the Prophet ﷺ receives revelation. We all know he receives revelation at the age of 40, and he's now delivering this message early in Mecca to the Quraysh. And something that's not very commonly known is that the main opposition to the Prophet ﷺ was not the average people. It was not what you call nowadays the lower class or the middle class. The opposition of the Prophet ﷺ was the political class and the upper social and economic class. The billionaires, the multimillionaires and the billionaires of the time, and the politicians of the time, these were the main opponents of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you hear names, even growing up as Muslim, you've heard the names Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, right? You've heard these names before. Each one of them is either from the billionaire class or they're from the political class, right? And they're both together. So a quick comment is important about the relationship between power and money, because some of these people are in power and some of these people have a lot of money, right? And these two things, power and money, have always been married to each other, even though they're not always in the same hands. So in some cases, they're in the same hands. So you'll have, for example, in some countries in the world today, you'll have the royal family. They've got majority of the money and they've got all the power, right? So kings concentrate money and power in one, right? And then you have other places in the world, like it's becoming clear now about the country in which we live, that there is the facade or the pretend that it's a democracy. But in reality, there's only two things in power. There are people with political power and there are people with money. And actually, more so, it's the people with money that control the people with political power, and everybody else likes to pretend they're living in a democracy where everybody's vote counts equally, right? So it's a pretend society. But in reality, those two elements have always been there throughout history, and they're always going to be there, right? That's just the nature of how power structures happen in society. Just some nations are more honest about it than others. That's all it is, right? So you might have, for example, the power belongs not just in the hands of politicians, the power belongs in the hands of the military. And there are countries in the world that if you come from one of these countries, you already know. They'll have elections and a different president will come in, different prime minister will come in, different party will come in, but everybody knows it's really the military that runs the country. Everybody knows. Look, we're all pretending that it's voting and elections and who's the prime minister and president, but behind it is Big Brother who says, hey, by the way, toe the line or you're not going to be around for the next election, or somehow there's going to be some charge against you or whatever, or you might disappear, right? So it's really the politicians that are in power, right? Now, this is, by the way, the same is true of the Catholic Church and the Roman Empire, right? The Catholic Church, and this was a third dimension actually, which I also want to introduce to you. So there's money, there's power, and then there's religion. So I'll introduce the third factor: money, power, and religion. So what happens in society is kings needed a way to make sure that the society remains loyal to the king, right? The society must remain loyal to the king. So what kings usually did was they kept a priest class, like the pharaohs had their magicians and their priest class. Or in the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, he had the people that were interpreting the dream for him, remember? These were the spiritual saints or whatever they were, the mystics of that time, the religious class, the clergy. Just like the Roman Empire had the Catholic Church, right? So there's this religious class, and their job is two things. Their job is not just to teach religion to the people, but through teaching the religion, they're teaching people to do two things. One, give charity not to each other, not to the poor, give charity to the church, right? Number one. And two, pray for the king or pray for the queen. God save the king, God save the queen. They got two jobs. They got to collect money from the people for the sake of their salvation, and they've got to make sure people remain loyal to the king because God has blessed the king to be king. God has endorsed the king, right? So the religion, its role was to make sure people stay in line. That was actually its role. Now, it's interesting what's happened in our times. Religions become largely irrelevant for newer generations, right? So their parents were much more church-going, temple-going, even masjid-going, and the next generation is not. So you know, the power structures had to figure out a new religion. How do they congregate people? How do they get people to be loyal? So the new religious entity actually became media. The media has, in a sense, social media or mass media, entertainment media, in a sense, started replacing religion in our societies. So you used to have religious structures that are constantly feeding a certain kind of message to the people, but now it's media entities that are, spreading a certain kind of message to the people. But that's a discussion for another time. Coming back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where we get all of this from.